Good morning, everybody. Welcome to episode 000049 of Live Live. Really excited to have George Hodges-Fulton here. George is a business guy, business coach, former construction executive, remodeling. He knows the entire world. And full disclosure, he works with my company, LiveCo, and helps to guide us, or does guide us. And we actually had our quarterly planning meeting yesterday. So this is kind of unique because you basically had to stare at my face all day yesterday and talk to me again about who knows what. And you kind of know, I would say you know more about my company, the inner workings, my personality traits and trends than any guest that I've had in 49 episodes. So I'm a little, I'm nervous, man. I'm like, I hope I don't screw this up. But George, thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. And as you said, we spent the day yesterday with you and your leadership team, and so I'm not so sure that you even want to spend any more time with me. So, but I know we're gonna have a great conversation. I'm sort of super excited, looking forward to it, and we'll just see where it goes.
Well, and just we don't need to talk about yesterday's meeting, but I would assume that your conclusion at the end of that full day session was, "We are the best company ever and we are perfect," right?
I don't want to use that phrase best company ever, because then I'll just get called out by another company that I have a meeting with next week. But in all seriousness, I'm always super happy and super proud of all of the organizations I work with when we are trending in the right direction, right? That's something your team has heard me say 100 times, but because it's not about perfection, right? Perfection creates a lot of anxiety. And I actually thought yesterday we had some super great conversations. Certainly not going to get into it, about what we specifically talk about the content, but the team challenged itself. I challenged it a little bit. And, I think at the end of the day, everybody was pretty excited, aligned, and motivated to go tackle the next 90 days, which, for me, as a coach and it just frankly fills my bucket, right? It's why I do what I do now. So it was an awesome day. I thought we had some really great conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to, lend a little bit more context to what that quarterly meeting is. So George, were a trained EOS implementer, trainer. Now you're with Pinnacle, which is a business operating system, right? You want to just elaborate a little bit more on what that looks like and how you work with companies and helping us, climb the mountain. All the metaphors of perfection is the enemy of profit. It's good to great, not good to perfect, like all that stuff, right?
Yeah, no, I think, we certainly start there, but, I guess I'll take a step back. I had a fortunate, I call it return on luck moment, or luck in my life. Return on luck is actually a Jim Collins concept, where he sort of says, no company is actually more lucky than anybody else. It is how you leverage that luck, how you get return on your luck, right? Kind of like a return on investment type concept. So my moment was really when I, was accepted the job at BOA, which we can get into, but they really introduced me to this idea of a business operating system. So EOS is a business operating system. Scaling Up, which is Vern Harnish's company, he wrote a great book called Mastering the Rockefeller Habits, is a business operating system. But anyways, yes, I mean, to your point, in 2019, I flew off to Detroit, was trained by Gino Wickman and his team at EOS to become an EOS implementer. I did that for about a year and a half. And due to some reasons that were changing within the EOS community, I decided that myself and my clients wouldn't be best served by that, along with several other Pinnacle coaches now. I don't want to create the illusion that I started Pinnacle or anything like that, but moved over to the Pinnacle platform pretty quickly. And so Pinnacle is also just a business operating system. As you can see from behind me, we kind of using climbing analogies. What's the pinnacle, the top of the mountain, that sort of thing. And so, our goal there is really shift from being an implementer or a consultant to more of a guide. Hey, I've kind of been here along. I'm kind of walking alongside of the team. I'm helping you. I'm experiencing, sharing. Sometimes I'm coaching, sometimes I'm teaching, sometimes I'm just facilitating conversations, right? But this idea of, kind of going with a guide and being a guide as opposed to just being a consultant who, frankly, comes into your business and just tells you what to do, right? So to your sort of initial question, Dave, is typically I work with my teams about every 90 days, get together. We sort of live in these, 4 quarters a year. And then, once a year we get together for 2 days and have a 2-day annual summit where we sort of regroup, gather, check out our tool stack, make sure nothing's rusty or, forgotten about, or, hey, what tools do we need for next year? And, frankly, it's just an opportunity to take a big, deep breath, look out on the horizon, hey, are some storms rolling in and do we need to hunker down, or do we look at it and say, hey, it appears to be some smooth sailing right now, or the sun is out. What can we do this year that maybe we didn't do last year because we've got some more oxygen or something like that. So, it's to me, those 4 meetings a year, again, one of them is a 2-day meeting. The other ones are just 1-day meetings. They're really some of the most important meetings for the leadership team and for the organization, because it really gets us aligned and getting all of that, frankly, human energy, harmonized and aligned in the business, and everyone agrees on what we're going to do and what the priorities are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, in my experience, yes, it's an operating system. It's how we operate, on a weekly, daily basis, monthly, quarterly, yearly. But it's a structure for growth in my experience. So I'm assuming everyone that you work with has the intent of improving and then growing with that. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, growth is an interesting, sort of word, right? Like,
Right.
what does it mean to each unique organization, right? So I don't presume when I start working with a company that growth means top line revenue, right? Sometimes we need to grow better before we grow bigger. And so, really identifying that in the first couple of days that we work together, we call that base camp. Hey, where are we going? Frankly, why are we doing this? Is this just growth for growth's sake? Is this growth because we have investors and we're required to, have a return on our CapEx? Or is it because this is where we actually want to go? That, these 3 to 7 people in the room, they want to reach a level, whether it be revenue or profit. It could be, frankly, number of people, lives impacted, right? So, what is the purpose behind the growth? Because, as we know from Simon Sinek, is what's your why? Start with why. If we're just growing for growth's sake, we're just going to burn people out. They're going to get turned off. They're going to, frankly, think that a lot of money is going into the owner's pockets, and we're just going to churn through people. People want that bigger, greater why, if you will.
Yeah, and I mean, I think another interesting point you made, there's a 3 to 7 people in the room. So that's the leadership team structure. So as opposed to just having an owner that says, okay, we're going to do this, go do it, figure it out. It's a leadership team, and ours is 5. We have 5 departments, including, the 2 owners who also run departments. And, we collectively work together to identify, where we want to go. Right. And then we strategize how to get there, and then, hammer all that out. So I think where it's been certainly the most powerful for us is because, the owner or the owners of a company are already pretty elevated, right? Just in the nature that they own the company. And so, yeah, whatever they say goes, more or less. But when you have other, leaders at your company or management that you're trying to elevate to that level, going it through a system like this, and having someone like you, George, a third party, guide implementer who kind of can see it from the outside, because you're not dealing with the day-to-day, has been invaluable for, empowering our team as a whole. That would be my sales pitch for, not necessarily you, but any sort of, business operating system, whether it's, metronomics or, in any real structure to invest in and to drive. I think having someone third party is exponentially more powerful than just figuring out on your own, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And then, there's a couple nuances in there that I'd like to dig into, and you sort of hit on them. But, in your particular case at LivCo, right, we're a leadership team of 5, but it's not consensus management, right? Everybody has a different perspective. Everyone's contributing, right? I require the people to be open and honest and maintain psychological safety in the room. But that being said, at the end of the day, somebody has to make a decision, right? So in our system at Pinnacle, we call it the second in command. EOS calls it the integrator, but generically general manager, COO, right? Somebody has to make that decision. And again, in your case, as I shared with Russ and you, literally on day one, I looked at the other team members and I said, guys, I want to make it clear, I don't work for Russ and Dave. I work for LivCo. And, if I say something, or if I push, or if I create accountability with them and they don't like it and they fire me, I'm actually okay with that, because I'm working in the best interest of LivCo, not for Dave and Russ. And as I think, as you said, right, as owners, right, you and Russ have through the years acquired a lot of knowledge, perspective. You've gone to a lot of training, right, NARI, RA, etc. Right. But often one of the things that I see quite frequently is that the owners are actually the biggest constraint to growth. And it sort of makes sense, because it all started with them, right? That's where, but when companies are still, having the owner who are simultaneously the strategist, the problem solver, the decision maker, the culture setter, frankly, the salesperson, right? They become the bottleneck. As we say in the coaching world, right? It's the chief cook, bottle washer, right? Sort of thing. And the bottleneck is always at the top. So one of the things that I have to really work with at the beginning is saying, look, the art of delegation is super important here, right? Some of these decisions you need to release. You have a director of design or an interiors person or a production manager, right? You've got to trust these people, and there's just gold in letting them fall over and get a little bruised, just like our kids are, when they're riding a bike or learning to play hockey for the first time, right? We got to let them make mistakes. That's where the opportunity comes in the coaching and the training, right? And so, ultimately there is companies can't grow or scale if everything's coming back to the owners or, frankly, one person, right? Even just the general manager, right? It becomes scalable when the organization no longer needs that person to do everything, right?
Absolutely. And if I back it up a little bit, because you said you kind of got introduced to this at BOA. So BOA is a large scale, high end design, build, remodeling company in Washington, D.C. So were they already running EOS system and then you became part of it, or you brought it to BOA, or a little bit of both? Did you run it? How did that evolve?
Yeah, no, not at all, in the sense that I certainly didn't bring it to them. In fact, they brought it to me. So as I said, at the beginning of the podcast, my real return on luck moment in my professional life was actually being offered a job and accepting the job at BOA. So one of the first things that happens at BOA, at least it did back then in 2003, is they handed me Vern Harnish's Mastering the Rockefeller Habit. Vern's business operating system is called Scaling Up. It's just a business operating system, the same way that we would refer to a vacuum, Dyson, Eureka. There's multiple iterations of it, right? And like Consumer Reports, some of them do some things really well, and some of them aren't so great. But regardless of that was when I was first introduced to that business operating system, and frankly, that is really what got me hooked. Frankly, at that point, 2003, I just gotten out of graduate school. I just wanted a job. I needed to drive some income, right, for the family, some revenue. But that's what got me really wanting a job and working in the business to, as I say, working on the business, right? And it really ignited a fire in me that frankly continues to burn, of just working on the business and helping businesses grow and become more functional and efficient. And frankly, being vulnerable, there's a childhood scar there, right? I grew up in a very, very unbelievably dysfunctional family business. which is what I would refer to my family as, because I'm not sure we were a family. I think it was, my parents looked at us as just laborers. And so, you know, I really grew up in this unbelievably dysfunctional environment. And I was like, man, it just can't be this hard. Like life, family, business, like it shouldn't be this way. And when I got introduced at BOA, you know, to their credit, you know, this idea of a business operating system, you know, efficiency and harmony and getting everybody rowing in the right direction and being able to challenge each other in a healthy, respectful manner and not just yelling. It was a game changer for me personally and professionally. There's no doubt.
Well, I could see, you know, in a construction business, especially because a certain degree of it is just naturally herding cats, right? It's a level of organized chaos. So in what we do, we're always trying to control what we can control and then understand that there's a percentage of that, which is, you know, going to be at risk or variable. And so, and how you operate your company is 100% controllable, right? And kind of the most important piece. So you look at different industries, and I'm curious kind of what other industries you work with too, but you know, you look at other industries where you're making a widget or something like that, and it's a little bit more boom, and they are structured in a way that is making that more efficient. And so construction, I just feel like needs that more than probably any other industry, just, and all the complexities that go into even accounting for it, right? Even the accounting systems are crazy. So on that note, are there, you know, you work with remodeling companies, certainly, and construction companies. You work with other industries as well?
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. You know, construction, blue collar trades are, you know, the sort of bulk of my portfolio in the sense of the clients that I work with. Because I came out of that industry, right? I mentioned earlier, I hold a master's degree in construction management. I'm unbelievably passionate about our industry, and I just enjoy working here, you know, in this space, whether it be, you know, actually in the business, right, or helping coach and guide. But yeah, I mean, I work with wealth advisors. I have an MSP. I have several government contractors. I'm located right outside of the Washington, D.C. area, so federal government contractors. You know, landscaping companies, similar to construction but slightly different. You know, that sort of thing. But Dave, I got to push back on you a little bit. Like, you know, it's organized chaos. It's herding cats in every industry. Yeah, actually, I have one client, you know, similar to your, I call it a widget factory, but they're a labels company. They print labels, and you know, even for them, even in a controlled environment, okay, it's air conditioned, right? You've got machinery. Some of them are done in a clean room, depending on what the label is going to for medical printing, that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, great businesses are, you know, having the talented people, right? That's our competitive advantage. But even if we just have talented people, they've got to have that clear vision. You know, they've got to be the right people, understanding why we're doing what we're doing, but being able to follow simple processes, right? You hear me say all the time, complexity kills growth, right? And then we've got to drive accountability, right? And then those people have to have the discipline to execute. I mean, I can't force you to do something. You know, all I can do as a leader, as a coach, manager, whatever word you want to use, is to really help you understand the end goal, give you the resources. That could be my time, that could be training, that could be the right tool, right? New piece of equipment, whatever. But if you don't have the discipline to execute, you know, we just need to have a conversation that says you probably don't belong here.
Absolutely. Well, and you mentioned, you know, master's in construction management. I have a master's in a 1-year master's in architecture. So how is that applicable to what I do today? It's more like an introspection piece of what I do today. You know, functionally, it didn't really teach me a whole lot. So, but in construction management and, you know, graduate courses there, are there a lot of business aspects of it as well, or operational aspects, or is it more, I just don't know what that curriculum looks like. Can you kind of lend some insight to that and how you're still using tools from what you learned there?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I can make it sound much more romantic than it probably is. But the reality is that any level of education, teaches you a discipline, it teaches you a curriculum. In my particular case, I needed to write a thesis, so it taught me about deep dive research, right? Things like that, how to structure research, how to make presentations. That's probably some of the biggest takeaways from the actual curriculum. But to be fair, it did go back into the masters in construction management, as if you really break apart the two words, construction and management, right? Where there was pieces that were pulled in from the MBA program. There were pieces that were pulled in from the undergraduate construction management program at the university. And so, yes, I deepened my knowledge with regards to construction, but also it was more broad-based into the management side of things. This is back in 2002, 2003. Things like Primavera, particularly for the big commercial contractors, were known, but weren't as robust as they are today. I mean, frankly, now, right, you pick up your iPhone and you've got more power than I had in a university library, tapped into a Primavera, program and so forth.
So what was your thesis?
Great question. So my thesis is actually a quick side note. My undergraduate degree is in history. I actually
that was UVA, right?
And I did.
We're okay with that.
I understand. It's hard for you tech people to accept me, but I
it's okay.
Appreciate it. Right. So, I actually wanted to be a high school history teacher. So the point of me sharing that is that my master's degree is actually, or the thesis itself was a decision support system for the repair of old and historic windows. So I was really sort of passionate about the history side and these old windows in our country that, many people, if you look around the world, particularly the Europeans, laugh at us, right? You're calling that an old window. And for them, it was practically installed yesterday, although it was 3 generations old. So frequently, we go into a building and we just pull things out, throw it in the dumpster and start over again. And the thesis was really saying, okay, well, how do we evaluate, old and historic windows? How do we then repair them? And repair is a generic term for, renovation and repair, et cetera. Because actually the National Park Service has some very clear, distinct words on repair as kind of the umbrella, and then there's different types of repair, meaning how much of the original material you're leaving in there, or if you've got to pull all the original material out, are you using historic methodologies and materials to replace that, or are you actually pulling that material out and then installing new modern materials with new technology? There's different actual distinctions in that. And so this decision support tree is designed to help you decide which route to go depending on the actual condition of the window that you're looking at, right?
See, there you go. Decision support tree. Still, and just on the window stuff, because I studied overseas for a semester, and we were in Ticino area of Switzerland, and a beautiful, 1,200-year-old casa. And the windows, you had the casements that would open out. No, they opened in. Casements opened in, and the doors and the windows all had a little cant to the bottom hinge, so they were automatically self-closing just by laws of physics because the bottom hinge was out. It's like, that's brilliant. Just a little stuff, they did that like 1,200 years ago. Okay, so that backstory lines up a little bit, right? Because now you brought construction and history into the world of remodeling, which and repurposing and trying to understand that stuff. So I'm sure you had a lot of fun in that world. When you started at BOA, were you at a higher level, or did you start lower on the totem pole there and work your way up?
So I started at BOA in 2003, and I started as a production manager.
Okay.
And then ultimately sort of worked my way up. The really interesting thing is what happened along the way is that I started as a production manager in a pretty small division. To be frank, we were kind of the redheaded stepchild. The percent of revenue on the P&L was pretty negligible. but it was something BOA was interested and committed to growing because they saw a void in the marketplace in this sort of smaller division working on smaller projects.
Is that what it was? It was kind of a small project division.
Yeah, and I think it's relative, and I think it's important to this conversation because BOA historically even in 2003 was working on fairly large projects, right? So something in BOA's wheelhouse in 2003 was a $400,000 project and on up well past single digit millions, right? $2, $3, $4 million projects, and that was still remodeling, in DC, not new homes, and then they sort of had a small little warranty department. It was, at that point, it was really one or two guys, and they would do, small, warranty repairs, that sort of thing, customer service stuff. And they would take on a quick $10,000, $12,000 project. But there was this void between like $25,000 projects and $250,000 projects. And so that was the division that I was hired into. And it was fairly new and young, and it was this idea and concept, right? How do we become more of a solution for all of our clients for perpetuity or for life, as opposed to just doing a large remodel and then walking away, right? What happened was, the interesting part of it is that when the salesperson for that department left, remember my whole background is in production management, even construction management master's degree is the salesperson left, and I started looking around the horizon, and I was like, well, I'm going to chew through this work. What's going to happen to me? I'm going to literally work myself out of a job. And so I went to the company and I said, look, I'll sell it and I'll build it. So I became a little bit of a seller doer model within BOA, which is not their business model. And I accidentally created my own little business within BOA, right? We had our own P&L. I ended up by sort of default as division manager. I ended up hiring a production manager and then a salesperson. And ultimately, we grew that division to about 15 million within a $35 million design build company. Along the way, I became general manager, a member of our executive leadership team. So started as a production manager, but definitely progressed through a meandering path and several other side quests along the way in my 14 years there.
I guess it's a meandering side quest, but it kind of comes down to one of those fundamental things of like, you just went out and did it. You learned, like good stuff happens when you do things.
Yeah. I think, it's one of my colleagues sort of has, this sort of, we have lots of snarky sayings in coaching, and he says, if you think growth is expensive, try standing still. Right. So, it was kind of one of those moments where it's like, well, if I stand still, I don't know who's going to sell, and what's the company going to do with a production manager who's just on overhead at that point with nothing to produce. Right. So I was like, well, I better not stand still. I better go out and figure out how to sell. And, and fortunately, again, to BOA's credit, I really honor them in the sense that they've made me the person that I am today, in addition to a lot of hard work and my family supporting me. But, they always said, okay, sure. You want training? You want to go to Sandler? Sure. We'll support you. Go to Sandler. You want to become a salesperson? You want to learn to sell? Okay, great. Sort of thing. And so, they obviously put a lot of trust in me. Hopefully I earned it. I assume I did, or they wouldn't. But, but that was a great opportunity for me at the same time.
Heck yeah. Well, knowing all the companies that you've worked with over the years and continue to work with, what are some kind of consistent areas where you see, I'm just looking for George predicting the future / using your own data, your own mindset data, where do you see companies stumble the most? What are kind of the bumpiest parts of the journey in your experience? All of it?
You certainly could, create, but frankly, as we say in the coaching world, when everything's important, nothing is. So, if I said to you all of it, it's really not helpful for our conversation today. But there
doesn't make
for
a very good show.
Yeah, right. You're going to be out of a podcast, and my clients are going to fire me. So I'm going to be calling Russ and asking for a job if I'm not careful, right? So. But no, I mean, I think there's a couple things. I mean, we know in our industry, right, that there's a labor crunch, right? It's hard to find qualified labor. So, I think figuring that out, right, working with the trade schools, having the time to, really nurture somebody and train somebody, right? If I could wave a magic wand and I won the lottery, I would start an apprenticeship program and frankly become the training program for every remodel in America, and just have them compensate the graduates as they came out, right? So I think we've lost our way in this country a little bit, right? We used to have, particularly Europeans, would have these great apprenticeship programs, and we've gotten away from that. Fortunately, I feel like there's a little bit of a tide. We're starting to shift back into that, right? But for generations, every kid was go to college, and now we're seeing that labor crunch, and frankly, not every kid, not every person belongs in college, right? There are some, I believe, very hardworking people out there who have talent, who have the ability to work with their hands, and they're not getting a lot of the support that they should, whether it be from home or the school system, or they just haven't found a great mentor who's been able to give them that guidance. So going back to your question is, what's some of those points? We've got to figure out a way to develop our labor. And when we do that, the next level is that labor needs to go from doer to leader, right? For instance, right, just because I'm a great carpenter doesn't mean that I'm a great lead carpenter, right? Just because I'm a great salesperson doesn't mean I'm a great sales manager. So I think, some of the hardest things that I see is people making those transitions and realizing that as you're sort of being promoted, your job is changing, right? And that the skills that made you successful in your old job are not necessarily the skills that are going to make you successful in this new role. At some point, right, our job as great leaders, it stops becoming, problem solver and becomes, building people who can solve problems. And so, I think that's one of the opportunities that are on the horizon. There's several others, but I think that's one place I would go naturally because, I mentioned it earlier. It's all about the people, right? We can have the greatest systems in the world. We could have the greatest software, whatever. But if we don't have people, there really are the competitive advantage at the end of the day.
Well, on that note, elaborating on that or expanding on that a little bit. So in working with you, as a Pinnacle guide, a big part of what, other than the coaching specific to our business is, you say all the time, the answers in the tools. So you guys have a kind of a massive toolbox that you kind of coach and help implement, right, or release to our companies. And you don't give us everything. There's not a whole toolbox. You kind of selectively pick what is maybe appropriate given whatever's going on, so we don't get too overwhelmed and our heads explode. So as it relates to kind of the labor aspects of things, what do you think is probably the most valuable tool in the toolbox to help companies or owners get through that?
Yeah, I would start like you said. I mean, it starts with the people, right? And so and the tool that I love to sort of the bedrock tool, if you will, that one that I always go back to and I remind people of is, guys, let's go back to the talent assessment, right? And the talent.
I knew you were going to say that.
It's just because it's such a great one, right? Because I think what happens is we start talking about people and we start telling ourselves a story, right? Well, they didn't do this because of this or X, Y, or Z. And at some point we need to sort of stop that storytelling, and we need to get away from that, subjective, emotional decision-making or perception of people. And we need to make it as objective as possible. I want to make it very clear, human resources, being a great leader, is by definition very, very subjective, and the ability in my own, emotional intelligence and ability to relate to somebody is hugely important and impactful in my career and their career. But if I'm coming to the leadership team and I'm saying to you, hey, I have a problem with a carpenter or a project manager, it's much more healthy for me to come and say, hey, I have a situation. if I pull out the talent assessment, which I'll briefly describe to the audience, is in essence an XY axis. The Y axis of the vertical side is how much of a cultural fit are they within our organization, right? We're talking about the culture side of our business, and then the X axis is the horizontal is just frankly how productive are they in their job, right? Do they actually just get stuff done? And so as opposed to me coming and saying, hey, I've got a carpenter and I have an issue, it's much more healthy if I say, hey, I've got a carpenter, I've got an issue. You know what? They're actually an amazing installer, right? We'll call them an operator or a technician, but they're a very, very, very low cultural fit, right? They're always undermining the authority of the organization. They're throwing their colleagues under the bus. And so, from a cultural fit, they're frankly just unacceptable. Well, now, of course, as a leadership team, we can have a conversation because we sort of understand much more deeply what's the actual issue on the table, if you will, right? And, so if you come to me as a general manager and you say, I have an issue with a carpenter, my probably natural reaction is, well, let's send them to school, or let's go have them, follow along or mentor, one of our senior carpenters for 3 days and see if they can pick up some additional skills. But I'm not addressing the actual issue, which in this case, in this example, is the cultural side. So now that we've had that conversation, I say, look, okay, as general manager, I'm happy to jump in. Let me go have a conversation with them and walk them through our core values and remind them that, on day one, we committed to them. These core values need to be coursing through your veins, and that they really, again, define what makes a right person for our unique organization. And, our commitment as a leadership team is that we're going to surround you with people who exude these core values. And if you don't, then we need to have a conversation. And frankly, you get to choose, right? I'm not going to tell you whether you work here or you don't work here, quote, by firing you or allowing you to stay within the organization. We're going to have a conversation if this is important to you. And if it's not important to you, then we're going to ask you to leave and go work for somebody else. Because frankly, everybody has a different culture. You might fit in somewhere else really well, and that might be okay. You just don't fit in here.
Awesome. Love it. So on kind of the stumbling points, you're perfect, George. So I don't want to take that away from you. Have you ever stumbled or had any black eyes?
First of all, right. Dave, why would you even ask such a silly question? That's just absurd.
Right. I know.
I live in this little.
All right, great show.
Yeah, this is wonderful, right? And meanwhile, my wife, who would be like, "Wait, hold on a second. Now we're just starting, so let's have the real conversation." Now she's.
But
she's
before
awesome.
you get to that, and not to interrupt, but I'm going to. I just had this conversation with my daughter last night because she decided that she doesn't want to sing, play piano, guitar, or learn the drums anymore. She just wants to do acting. That's it. And I said, well, why don't you want to do like you've always liked doing all those other things? And she's like, well, because I'm afraid I'm afraid I'll fail. It's like my 9-year-old daughter. Like, you're afraid you'll fail. Like, isn't that the most important part? Is the learn from the failing. I mean, how many Michael Jordan quotes are there about this whole subject? So anyway, so let's hear your failure story.
Yeah, well, and to your point, right? Like I think this is actually kind of a societal problem, right? We need to embrace failing forward, right? Certainly not my quote, not my phrase, but for years, you think about your kids and they ask why, and we spend years as parents, as teachers, actually basically, beating that out of them, right? Like, don't ask why, just go do, right? Sort of thing. And so, this natural curiosity, we sort of train, people to lose, and then we get them back into the workplace and we ask them, be curious, ask questions, challenge us, like, don't just follow the directions. And yet they've spent, in most cases, minimum 12 years, if not 16 years through university, sort of learning to not ask why. Right. But I'll go back to your question. When I first meet a prospect, if you will, right before I'm hired, one of the things that I say, look, my value add is that I've got a million black eyes. I did a million things wrong at BOA. And my goal is, if I can share or experience share 2 or 3 of those with you and your leadership team and smooth out your ride, that to me is very successful in the sense of it's, or I should say very fulfilling for me. But I would say, something I absolutely got wrong, something that if every once in a while somebody asks you, hey, do you have a regret, or could you go back and change one thing in your career? This story I'm going to share with you is the one that I always go to. And I set it up by saying, it's certainly in the coaching world, right? For a lot of us, it's about processes or playbooks, right? And we sort of say the system sets you free, right? Isidore Sharp, who's the CEO or was the CEO at Four Seasons, he has a great quote that says, systemize the predictable so that you can humanize the exceptional, right? And the idea here is that, there's only so much human energy we have every day, right? But if I give you the process, now within the process or the framework is an enormous amount of creativity. So, I now believe, I didn't, which is the story I'm going to share with you, is that the process actually protects creativity. So the more process and structure and handoffs and understanding who does what, where, and when exactly within the process creates an enormous amount of creativity, because I don't have to think about the next deadline or the next, outcome or objective. I get to spend all my time, getting there, if you will, right? So the right system shouldn't restrict great people. It should actually give them freedom to do their best work. And so the thing that I got wrong was that assuming a process that worked incredibly well in production, right? Remember, that's my background, production management, that sort of thing, would work equally well in a creative environment. And so when I was at BOA, one of the things that I was responsible for was, yes, as a design build firm, we were design build, but we had subcontractor outsourced a lot of our design, architecture, designers, that sort of thing. And so I was responsible for helping build and develop our architecture department, bringing the design part of the design build in-house. And as I said earlier, my background was heavily rooted in production and project management. And, I understood critical paths and schedules and dependencies and deadlines and, frankly, the importance of keeping things moving forward, right?
Yep.
So naturally, that's how I approached architecture, right? So,
it's like that. It's very linear.
Of course, right? So, I'm sitting here, in Monday morning meetings. What's the schedule? What's the deadline? What's the next deliverable? What's holding us up, right? And I expected the same kind of predictability and cadence that, I had learned to expect in production, right? And so what I didn't understand at the time was that managing creative work, as though I was managing production work, was not very healthy. Right. And I created a lot of tension, had some wonderful disagreements with various architects and designers and so forth. And so what I neglected to realize, and the thing that I got wrong is that the architects didn't necessarily need me to tell them exactly how to get the work done. They just needed a clear framework with good inputs and clear expectations, and then enough time and space to actually think and create, right? As we say in Pinnacle, I needed to give them oxygen, right? As you're climbing the mountain and you get higher, the oxygen is less. And I was putting more structure and constraining them and putting a straight jacket on them. And really what I should have been giving them was a free flowing oxygen tank, right? And just sort of saying, breathe it all in, it's okay, right? And so, as I said, I created this constant tension around timelines and deadlines. And and from my perspective, we weren't moving fast enough. And from their perspective, all I was doing was just imposing more, production constraints, if you will, right? And so, and then, of course, it becomes like it starts spiraling out of control, right? It becomes like this self-fulfilling prophecy, right? The harder I controlled it, the harder they pushed back, et cetera, right? And so the problem wasn't necessarily the people or their commitment. It was my model was wrong. Right. And so that's really the thing that I learned. And I was trying to manage the output before I had created the right environment for the work to get done. Right. And so, production needs a process that drives the work, of course, and the creative needs a framework or a process that enables them to do the work. Right. So I was confusing, structure with control, if you will. Right. So
Absolutely.
Frankly, what I learned is that, that great leadership isn't about making everyone work the way that I worked and the way that I wanted to work. It was about creating the conditions, that allowed different kinds of people to do their best work. And I would suggest or share with the audience that I probably lost 2 to 3 good years at BOA learning that lesson. That yes, we did work, yes, we stayed in business, but I chewed through some great designers, some great creative people, and we probably lost 2 to 3 years of non-quantifiable work, right? Sort of unintended consequences of just slowing down the process that we could have been a little bit further ahead faster.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty common struggle for, not even just people coming at it from a production manager side, but even at architecture firms, which is why, historically you just start running the clock, and that's how you bill, But because when a project comes across your desk that you have to design, you don't know how long it's going to take to design that, because you don't even know what it is yet. Sometimes it gets there quickly, sometimes it doesn't. And there might be communication circles, depends on so many different variables. So kind of the way that we structure that is, once we field measure and we start designing, yes, we want to have everything pre-scheduled, but we don't know how long it's going to take us to design it until we really unpack it and get our brains into it. Then once we have a direction, then it kind of kicks into the production. Then we know exactly what we need to produce. We know what the deliverables are. We know the software that we're going to use. We know the format. We know we have it. That's when the checklist starts. But there is kind of that creative box in there where that's the moving orb. And I think Chip Doyle will be on in a couple weeks. And, part of what we're having him work with our team on is, and we just talked about it yesterday, actually, is the communication to be able to get the answers to inform the design more efficiently, right? So that's a structure that you can control to be able to get to that. And then the production aspects of it. I guess like my one comparison is probably the most organized firm definitely the most organized firm I ever worked for. It was my first job. It's Arc Ideas. Brad Novak has actually been on the show, and he ran what was called BradCAD. So we worked in AutoCAD, and it was a kind of a crazy system. So you had to name every plan, every elevation, every section would be its own file. Where if a lot of architects who are just freewheeling it, you have one giant endless screen and you draw everything in this one screen. No, that would not work here, because it doesn't feed into the drawing sheets that we need and what needs to be produced. And so you had boxes defined of where you needed to draw your work. You had to use your layers properly. So if you didn't use the layers properly, none of the system would work and your drawing wouldn't look right. And you had to name the file properly. So anybody that works there knows what an ABOP is. It's an architectural base overall plan. 0-100 would be the first floor. And that naming convention would then run a script to then process those layers to make the line weights the right size. Didn't have to think about it. Just had to follow the rules. And it was mind blowing. It's like how a well-run restaurant operates, Boom, boom, boom. All these things happen so that you can then, what do you say? So that you can control the exceptional.
Yeah, right. Yeah, like you really humanize the exceptional.
Humanize it, yes. Humanize the exceptional.
But to your point, like that's an exact example of Brad required you to work within, quote, his framework, but it enabled you to do an enormous amount of creative work within the framework, right?
Yeah.
And it's just an awesome point of, the system sets you free, right? I mean, it really does.
1,000,000%, because we didn't have to deal with all that other stuff.
Right. Yeah.
George, we're running late here, man, as usual.
That's weird. Well, it's a great, it's a great conversation. I think it's so easy just to kind of jump into a flow and have a conversation with you. It's certainly lots of fun. So
Yeah, I know. Kind of time flew by. So we'll have to do this again, maybe after our annual. George, any last thoughts / where can people find you and all that good stuff?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, not so sure I have any, great last thoughts. Maybe, more just, look, I think that, you need to educate yourself, right? Maybe a last thought is you've got to put in the work, right? Any education, any training you do, nobody can ever take away from you. I'm a firm believer in sort of continual self-improvement, right? You're always learning, always pushing, right? That sort of thing. And it's sometimes not even just in your industry, right? You could be looking outside to, get a spark from somewhere. So yeah, that's probably my last thought, if you will. From where can people find me? My website is just www.ghf.llc. You can send me a message from there. But frankly, I think, Dave, hopefully you and your team feel this way. I try to be really open and accessible. I have no problem. My cell phone is 703-955-6537. Like, literally just call me or text me. Just say, hey, I heard you on Dave's podcast. I'd love to chat with you about something. I love chatting with people. Sometimes it's awesome just being a third party, right? Throw something at the wall and, hey, here's kind of my experience, share with that, right? I've got no horse in the race, right? I don't know you until you reached out to me. So I've always loved those conversations. I think they're super fun and, always something to learn.
I love it. Yeah. And you're 100% right. I think I text and call you a lot.
And it's great.
It's fun. And we're learning, we're hashing stuff out. And, instead of just trying to figure it out, it's fun to, throw stuff at the wall a little bit.
Yeah.
George, thanks again, man. Enjoy. I don't know, where are you headed next?
I'm literally, it's meeting season, but I'm literally heading out the door. I'm driving over to Ohio this afternoon. Going to move my youngest daughter in for her second year at university tomorrow at Ohio University. And that's what I'm doing this afternoon and tomorrow. But it's as we say, it's sort of annual season, right? Typically right around Labor Day, we start meeting with all of our teams and 2-day meetings to get them ready for 2027. So it's an exciting time of the year, pretty busy on the calendar. But man, it's very emotionally fulfilling and gratifying and rewarding for me, while being a little bit physically exhausting. But it's awesome, right? Get to see all the great work people did, and then talk about next year and get aligned and excited again. So good stuff.
Heck yeah, love it. All right, George. Thanks, man. We'll talk to you soon.
Yay, thanks, Dave. Talk to you soon. You take care. Have a great day. Thanks again.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
Oops. That button.